There are no shortage of bad investments out there, like this one or this one. And hindsight's always 20/20, but today I'm going to give you two principles to avoiding the worst investments out there. I'm Andrew Henderson, and I'm the founder of a company called Nomad Capitalist, where we help people understand the opportunities beyond their own country, whether it's lower taxes for their business or better investment opportunities. Heck, even your citizenship probably isn't the best citizenship out there. And so I don't want to talk about that particularly, but I want to talk about things that people do, thinking they're making good investments because they're not thinking outside of the bubble that they're in. And so the first rule that I follow to avoid bad investments is you want to be organic. Where I'm from in the United States, for example, people are constantly looking for tax-advantaged investments merely because they're tax-advantaged. So, for example, people buy municipal bonds, right? Basically, a bond is you're buying a company at 60 PE ratio, 50 PE ratio, 30 PE ratio, whatever the bond pays, with no chance of increasing the earnings. And so you're locking yourself into a potentially bad investment. I'm not saying that bonds are bad for everybody, and I'm not giving you investment advice. But if you're doing that because municipal bonds don't have the same tax to pay on what you earn, then that's not an organic investment. And a lot of people do that, and they're shifting how they invest. Another thing that's been in the news in the United States in recent years are the opportunity zones. These are kind of fading out right now. But for years, people were talking about putting money into opportunity zones because they were tax advantaged. Opportunity zones are places that have had problems, disadvantaged areas where the government wanted to bring money in. And admittedly, there were a few where I seem to think, like, this doesn't seem like a very disadvantaged area. That seems kind of interesting. But most of them were truly distressed communities that just people didn't want to invest in unless they were getting an incentive. I can tell you, as someone who did an experiment years ago, investing into a distressed area where the government pays the tenants rent, it just didn't work. I don't want to deal with distressed stuff, even if it means getting a tax break. If you would not go there and invest on your own without the tax break, it's probably not the best investment. And I've seen that time and time again in my own investing, where you think, hey, I'll just kind of increase the return a little bit here. I'll do this kind of thing, trying to pump things up a little bit. It's like probably the best strategy to making good investments is just finding good companies at a fair price that have long-term durability and just invest in those companies, get rid of the tricks, get rid of anything that's not organic. Just invest in the right companies. And so if you do that living in the United States or in Canada or Australia, you're going to pay tax on dividends that you receive. You're going to pay tax on capital gains when you sell. And even in some of these countries, they want to tax you before you sell on your capital gains. That may be coming in the future. However, if you would like to reduce your taxes on investments, let's say stocks, you can choose to move to another country. And for everyone but Americans, you'll be able to get out of your country's tax system, get into a new country's tax system, and those organic investments that you're making that just make sense are going to make more sense because you're going to have a better deal, particularly on capital gains, where you can reduce, if not eliminate, the tax that you pay on that. And so rather than choosing lesser investments where the returns may not be as good, or the risk is higher, or you're investing in areas where there's a reason perhaps people haven't gone there, why not do things that are organic? And so my perspective on a country like the United States is that it's had a great run over the years, but it's lost touch with what made it a successful place. And in my lifetime, now at 38 years old, I've spent pretty much all of my life watching its rankings and all the indices go down. Economic freedom, down. Personal freedom, press freedom, all of it's gone down. Quality of the passport, gone down. The United States, and probably where you're living, is not number one in everything, let alone probably anything. And so if you are only investing in your country because it has always worked, understand it may not work forever if the things that made it work stop working. And merely saying, well, I'm getting a tax advantage on this lesser investment, that's like people who say, I'm going to have a mortgage for the exclusive purpose of writing off the interest. But you're still paying the interest, right? You're still losing money on the interest. Now, maybe you could say there's an opportunity cost issue, but if you're just saying paying as much interest as possible so you can write it off, it just doesn't really make sense because you're still losing money. And I look at that way at municipal bonds, and I look at that way with opportunity zones. You're taking an opportunity cost issue because you're engaging in inorganic behavior for taxes. If you lived in a place that did not tax you, And you can do that. I mean, there's plenty of places you can get residence in the Gulf. There are countries in Southeast Asia. There's places in Central America. There's even countries in Europe. They may tax you a little bit, but a lot less than what you're paying now. But let's just say you lived, and by the way, you can become a citizen of a country like St. Kitts and Nevis. 0 personal tax, 0 corporate tax. Imagine you lived there. Imagine you got citizenship by making a donation in St. Kitts and Nevis, and you've moved down to your new Caribbean paradise, and you no longer had to worry about taxes. Now, yes, if you invested in US or Canadian or French stocks and they paid you a dividend, that dividend, because it's sourced at that country, they would withhold tax at a higher level in your tax-free country than they would if you lived in a tax country. So on that, you would pay more, but on your capital gains, you'd be free. Would you? And by the way, you'd have access to invest in plenty of other places like Singapore or Hong Kong or countries in the Gulf where they don't tax your dividends, they don't tax your interest. Even countries like the United States wouldn't tax interest that you earn in their banks if you're not a citizen or resident. And so if you had that, if you no longer had to worry about tax, would you invest in some rural town in a part of the United States? Would you invest in municipal bonds? Maybe you would, and in that case, then it's an organic decision. But most people are investing in these things because they're getting a tax deal. And it's almost like having a mortgage just for the tax deduction, or I see people like in the stock market, they're like, oh, I'm going to have a covered call strategy. Covered calls, hey, again, I'm not giving you investment advice. I think that could be a good strategy, having covered calls on stocks you intend to own in the long run. But sometimes the covered call goes crazy and the stock goes through the roof, and that little call premium you got ends up losing you a lot of money. And so you tried to be cute and collect a little premium, and you ended up losing a lot on what you thought was a good investment. You should have just stayed with a good investment and gone all the way up with it, rather than like trying to do little things to save a few bucks or make a few bucks here and there. That's kind of how I look at inorganic investments and things like opportunity zones. And a lot of countries around the world are trying to incentivize you to do stuff that you shouldn't want to do. Like, you don't want to do it. That's why you're not doing it. That's why they have to incentivize you, because people won't do it unless they throw a few crumbs your way. But if you lived in a tax-free place, you wouldn't make those investments, and you'd probably come out better. So rule number 1, be organic in your investments. Number 2 is don't follow the herd. Now, this can be hard. People like to say phrases. One thing I've learned, running a company with lots of employees, dealing with people all around the world, is people like to say things and then do the opposite. I think that's human nature, right? People will say, buy low, sell high. People will say, buy when there's blood in the streets. People will say, because it sounds smart, be fearful when others are greedy, be greedy when others are fearful. Like, those are, common investing aphorisms that people want to follow. But do they follow them? Often not. People get excited. Bitcoin's at an all-time high. I should get some before I miss out. The tech bubble is in an all-time high. I don't want to miss out. I mean, my father, was in the financial business, and people would be calling when these stocks were like at an all-time high. I can't miss out on Qualcomm. And it'd be like, what? Like, maybe you should have bought Qualcomm a couple years ago, And so it's easy to say, be greedy when others are fearful. But when people are fearful, are you going to be able to pull the trigger? And so, to me, people are pretty fearful based on oftentimes decades-old realities of Colombia or Indonesia or Egypt. Now, there are obviously some countries around the world that just aren't that investable. But if something happened in the news that was probably played up in the Western media, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, someone threw a rock in a city square and some stuff happened, does that mean the country's no longer investable? Right? If the fundamentals of the country are there, some kind of issues, that may not stop you from investing there. I mean, look at a place like Egypt. I'm not saying Egypt's for everybody, but we have an in-house real estate department, and we have real estate agents all over the world that help people buy property at the actual fair market local price. So if you want to hire Nomad Capitalist Real Estate Service, we have lists of transactions, what properties are actually selling for, because we've actually done the due diligence and we actually work on the ground. And so we can say, hey, here's a fair deal. And so you look at a property price in, let's say, Cairo, Egypt, one of the cheapest places in the world to buy property. And so I look at a place where you've got a huge population, not only in the city, but in the country, one of the biggest urban areas in the world. You have a country that has had some problems, but you can also see some things where they're moving in the right direction. You may not want Egyptian citizenship, which you can get if you invest. That's probably not as big of a kicker as it would be in most other countries. But if the fundamentals are interesting to you, the fact that there have been some challenges, there's a chance to buy things at a deep discount much, much, much cheaper than you'd pay somewhere else where you thought the US wasn't risky, you thought Canada wasn't risky, and prices there are heading down 10, 20, 30% in many markets. You felt more comfortable, but was it really more comfortable? It was easier to buy into the comfort than to buy into the economic reality, in part because it's easy to follow the herd. And so I've done pretty well, even on small real estate investments in places like Colombia, in places like Serbia. I'm not saying that's where you should buy. I'm not saying there's still opportunity. And I'm not saying that those are places that you can scale up 100x from what I've done. But if you see that people are fearful about certain countries and they're talking about, hey, Pablo Escobar, that was like 40 years ago, 35 years ago at this point. And so those issues are largely gone. In the same way, right now, everyone's talking about AI. And I'm not saying that AI won't play a role in our life, but I'm always a little afraid when people who know nothing about it are just jumping on the bandwagon. I've seen this my entire life. I was in a business where we would sell to people in the financial industry, and it was, today's mortgage brokers are tomorrow's foreclosure guys, are the next day's gold sellers. These people had no conviction. They just jumped from what's hot to what's hot to what's hot, and there was kind of a sliminess to it with these guys. They'd close down one business once gold was no longer popular. They wouldn't pay their employees for the last month. And I wonder, those guys really never create lasting wealth because they're always on to the next thing. If you're into AI and that's your thing and now it's having a moment, that's great. Same with crypto. Do something that you really believe in and believe in it because it has the right fundamentals, not jump into stuff when it's popular. I believe there are countries out there that just literally are operating on press that happened the day I was born. And they're still thinking that because no one's ever told them differently. And so if everyone's talking about it, you probably don't want to be in it. The dot-com bubble happened, and then after that happened, newspapers were saying the internet was over. That's when you wanted to get in. That's when people were starting the companies that are now doing very well online, not when everyone just threw money at you, and it was easy, and it just encouraged people to fail almost. Once everything did collapse, then you had real entrepreneurs who came in and built stuff. And so if you're following the herd, you're not going to really get that far ahead. And so that's why I've said, yes, I have some U.S. stock exposure. I have some U.S. bank exposure, but I'm extremely diversified because I think there's a lot more upside in other places. And so the most organic, unherd-like thing is finding the best deals no matter where they are. We do the same thing in our business at Nomad Capitalist. We hire the best people no matter where they are, right? We don't overpay just because we want to hire someone in the U.S. or the U.K. or Australia where there's people who get paid a lot. We can find people who they get paid a lot for where they live, but it's a better deal for all of us. And so why wouldn't you invest the same way, right? And so Nomad Capitalist helps people figure out, hey, you know what? Where can I go and put my money where I do have more diversification? Maybe I'm holding some other currencies. I'm hearing about this thing with the BRICS, and I'd like to be a little bit diversified from the dollar on that. And who knows what happens, with the Fed, the taxes are going up. We help our clients figure out, how do I go to improve my finances, my freedom, and my lifestyle, whether it's dual citizenship, legally reducing your taxes overseas, finding these new opportunities. We've got an entire in-house real estate department covering dozens of markets. And so if you don't know how to take advantage of this stuff, that's what Nomad Capitalist was set up for, because I've spent all these years that we've been doing this, going around and meeting the right people. And now I've leveraged my time to go and build a team to find the best people, because you can imagine, yes, U.S. markets are much more transparent, but transparent markets, Warren Buffett would talk about why we don't buy much real estate. Real estate's pretty hard to totally misvalue, right? And so the reason Berkshire Hathaway did so well all these years was, especially in the early years, they found a lot of companies that were totally, disjointed in value. They'll say there's fewer of those now, and there's fewer of them when you're managing billions of dollars. If you and I aren't managing billions of dollars, I believe you can find some of those same kind of very, arbitrage opportunities, especially in other markets. It doesn't have to be Colombia. It doesn't have to be Egypt. It could be somewhere that's in the Eastern European Union. It could be somewhere that's, in Southeast Asia. There's plenty of these opportunities happening. Nomad Capitalist helps people find them, whether you just want to focus on the real estate side or whether you're saying, hey, you know what? Why am I staying in a country where I pay higher taxes? Just because, I have investments. I can make my investments anywhere, right? Why am I staying in Canada to invest in stocks? I can do that in Dubai. I can do that in Panama. I can do that anywhere, right? So go to nomadcapitalist.com, learn more about what we do, but understand that for me, I want to be entirely organic. I don't want other little, distractions getting in my way of making good investments, and I don't want to follow the herd because the herd is chasing the thing that everyone's talking about, and that's the thing that crashes. I want to be doing the thing that people aren't talking about yet.